Born to Build podcast.
Welcome to Born to Build, conversations with the builders, founders, and pioneers driving change from the ground up. My name is Sam, and today we're chatting with Avril Thomas. Now, fun fact, she's my dear mother-in-law. But besides being a wonderful mom-in-law, she helped start Radio CCFM, a Christian community radio station in Cape Town. So wonderful to chat with you today, Mom. Thank you for agreeing to tell us more about CCFM.
Oh, wonderful to be with you, Sam, and wonderful to always share what God has done and is doing.
Yeah, amazing. We're sitting in your lounge, and we're going to hear some lovely stories, I know, because I've heard lots of these stories. And yeah, looking forward to chatting with you. Let's start at the beginning. How did CCFM get started 30 years ago?
Yes, back in November 1992, I had just led an evangelism training program at our church. And we were all around a braai talking about how it had impacted our lives. And one of the guys said, if only we could reach the whole of Fishhook with Jesus. People need to hear about Jesus. And one of the other guys who knew about technical matters, he said, you know what? The deregulation of the airwaves is in place. We need to apply for a license as a radio station. We can put posters up all over the valley and tell people to tune into Radio Fishhook. And we had planned to have a special week of outreach in September 1993. So we applied for a license for 3 or 4 hours a day for that week that we were having the outreach. Just for the Fishhook Valley, to reach our valley for Jesus.
So just quickly explain, what does the deregulation, what did that mean?
Well, up until then, there was just the government radio stations.
Okay.
There were no community radio stations.
Yeah.
There were no private radio stations. It was only the government. We were working in apartheid days. Sure. And so there was no voice for the community. And so this was incredible. And CCFM was the first legal licensed radio station to go on air on the 1st of September. We only got our results back on the 4th of August, 1993. We got a fax that said, you have been granted a license, not for 1 week, but for the whole month of September.
Amazing.
Not for 3 or 4 hours a day, but 24 hours a day, and not just for Fishhook Valley, but for the whole of Cape Town. So our massive dream was just tiny compared to what God had given us. Now, we had never been into a radio station before. We didn't know how radio stations worked. And so we literally, Dad, the pastor of the church, literally that night, it was a Wednesday, said to all the cell groups, come up with ideas of what programs you want, what things we should be doing. On Sunday, all come with your ideas and we're going to see how we're going to run this radio station. There was such excitement in the church. And I remember that Sunday when people started giving the ideas after the service. And Dad said, okay, those that are going to do early morning programs, you sit here. Breakfast shows, you sit there. Ladies programs, you sit there. Lunchtime programs, afternoon, evening programs. And literally people just sat in their sections. And we said, okay, now you brainstorm what needs to go into that program. What would you like to hear at that time of the day? And so fresh, wonderful, creative ideas came out of that group of people. Amazing. The most anyone had ever done technical was just a sound volume that went up and down with one mic. That's the most our technical.
Like in the church service.
In the church service, right. Yeah. And then some knew how to push the tape deck to record on a tape. Remember those old tapes? I don't know if you remember those.
Of course, yeah.
So that was the most. So we had to get people in to train us. And literally from that Sunday, for the next 3 weeks, we hot-seated people how to use a computer. There were only 4 PCs in the whole church. And those people lent us their computers. We taught people how to capture songs because we had to pay for every lyric or every song that we played on air, we had to pay royalties.
Right.
And so the easiest way was to actually capture everything that we had. And we asked everyone to bring in all their music. Any music that they had. Now, we hadn't thought through it.
And the music, was that all on tapes, or how did they bring in music?
It was on tapes. It was on records. LP records, and reel to reel. And so in our studio, we had carpets hung on around the walls. We had these tables that had blankets over them. We had a reel to reel that you had to splice each song that you wanted to. You'd measure exactly where it was and you'd cut it there, and then you'd splice it to the next part.
Amazing.
Tapes, we had to cue. You had to cue it and then put a pencil in and then turn it until it got tight. And that's how you cued your tape. Okay. We had LPs.
Yeah.
We hadn't heard of CDs yet.
No, of course. When did those come out?
They came in later. Yeah. When Dad went over later in December, he brought back 3 suitcases of CDs. And so we learned about CDs. But that first month was just incredible, as over 250 people from our local church took leave for a month to reach people for Jesus. It was an incredible time as the church just rallied with one focus: to be about our Father's business. And I think that was such an exciting part, Sam, is that all of us realized this was beyond us. This was something that none of us were able to do, but only God could help us. We encouraged every single person, whether they were going to be a presenter on air, whether they were going to do the technical, or whether they were going to be packing the CDs, tapes, reel to reels, whatever the people were going to choose for their program, to get a prayer partner. And my memories of those early days were just incredible. As somebody went into the studio, they were being prayed for at the studio door. And the presenter's prayer friend would stay there and pray for them. The technical person, whoever was doing the technical, their prayer partner would be sitting behind them, praying for them. We didn't know any better. We just had to trust God. And what was so exciting, we had one telephone line into the radio station. We'd never done this before. So this is like new stuff. And our line started jamming as people were phoning in and saying, that story that you were talking about, that I remember this one lady, she was suffering from post-menstrual depression. She said, that's my story. That's my story. Wow. I need Jesus like that woman. Jesus helped her. I need her help. And so people just started phoning in, asking for prayer. And we suddenly realized we needed at least 4 lines just for prayer.
I mean, it must have been such an amazing thing to even suddenly get phone calls out of the blue, right? Suddenly you're realizing, wow, these airwaves are going out to people's homes. People are listening to this live.
Yes.
Must have been amazing feeling as well.
Absolutely incredible. And people were listening 24/7 because we went live on the 1st of September at 5 a.m., 24/7 live, except we had a Billy Graham slot that we'd put in for our evangelism in the evening. And that was it. It was amazing. Sure. And I think for me, just the way people had to trust God, and because we couldn't trust anybody else, because there was nobody else to trust. We just had to get on and do it.
So who did you get in to do the training? Who taught you all this? You didn't have YouTube in those days to look up how to learn something.
Not at all. No, we got somebody in from SABC. We had a guy who was part of a film crew, and he came and he did some training with us. Wow. We had someone from Good Hope come and teach us about music, because we didn't even know about genres of music. I mean, music is music. You don't sort of understand. And so he was teaching us, as the day flowed, so we'd need to change our style of music according to the listener and all those kinds of things. And so all those things. So during the day, we hot seated with all the computers, training people on computers, sorting out the whole soundproofing, getting all the studio all sorted out. And in the evenings, we had training every evening until 12 o'clock. And so literally 8 a.m. to 12 midnight was training for 3 weeks before we went on.
Because people had taken leave to do this, to volunteer to do this, right?
And they did.
Amazing.
And that is what is amazing. Is there people just saw what God was doing and took up the opportunity to join hands and to reach people for Jesus. And we never expected what actually happened. It was only God. And like I said, with the prayer friends, we suddenly had to get more lines. After a week, the leadership of King of Kings Baptist just realized that this was far bigger than just the church, and that we needed to open this up to the greater church to be involved. And so we invited other people from other churches to come and help us with presenting and prayer friends, and that was just wonderful how all the churches came on board and started working together.
Wow.
And as it came to the end of the month,
yes,
now remember, we'd only prepared for a week. That's what we'd applied for. And suddenly we get a month. Everyone was saying, but you can't go off air. You can't go off air. We love this radio station. Amazing. And without even soliciting, because we didn't actually know about all these marketing things and what you should do.
Yeah, and were you planning to go beyond the month at all? Like, was that even a thought? No.
Never. We just wanted to reach people in 1 week.
Right, yeah.
And we got over 17,000 letters.
Wow.
We, in the beginning, did not even have a post box. And the post office manager, he just said, don't worry, just tell them Radio Fishhook and I'll keep a bag here for you. And literally we'd go and collect our bag.
So it was Radio Fishhook at that point.
Radio Fishhook, because that was our vision, was to reach Fishhook for Jesus.
And so you obviously had to transmit from somewhere. Where was that transmitted from? Was it from the church building? Or
It was from next door to the church. We had a little transmitter in the garage, and that actually transmitted straight up to Constantiaberg in the early days. Sure. And so we actually transmitted from Constantiaberg on 104.5. Changing lives for good. Radio Fishhook was absolutely incredible. And
you were just telling me earlier on that I mean, I don't know if it's that transmitter, but you've got a transmitter sitting in the back of your cupboard somewhere.
Yes, because what happened, because people wanted us to come on board, we applied for another license, but that was for December. And so in the December, we had to transmit to Elsie's Peak. And so we needed to literally switch the switch, and it would go up to Elsie's Peak. And so we had that transmitter that did that little section. Then from Elsie's Peak, it would go across to Tygerberg, because over the water, the radio waves travel much better.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, and that little transmitter is still sitting in your bedroom or somewhere, back to a cupboard somewhere. Amazing. So, tell me what happened after that first month. So people were demanding, please keep this radio on air. What happened then with the legalities? How did that work out?
So we got another license for the month of December because of Christmas. It had to be for a special event. And so we applied for it to be in December. And this time we had a whole lot more people from the Greater Valley, from the greater community, people who were keen on radio, who probably would never have had the opportunity to go onto commercial radio or the government radio at that time, came along. And so we were able to expand the number of people involved. It was still all volunteer basis. Literally for that month of December, we as a family, my children, Victor was 10 and Sherilyn was 7.
Yeah, I've heard some stories of Sherilyn sleeping in radio stations.
Yes. We moved in for the month.
You moved in, amazing.
Yes, and Victor and Sherilyn, they started a boerewors roll stand, and they were making boerewors there for all the staff that were coming in and out and making a bit of pocket money and spying on others who were falling in love behind the corners, and had a great time. Just serving God together as a family. And I think what was amazing is that for our children's programs, we used children's presenters.
Oh, cool.
And so Victor and Sherilyn were actually presenters. Yes. And Victor was only in grade 7 at that time. Oh no, he was grade 6. And the one day we had a technical problem. And I was there, but I don't know anything about technical things. I literally drove down to school, asked his teacher if he could come out. He came out of school and spent the next 3 hours sorting us out technically to keep the radio station going, which was absolutely wonderful. And computers were new because most people didn't know computers. And of course, as children, they had a ball with computers, playing computer games. And us adults didn't know anything about computers, but they could work it all out. But it was an incredible time of ministry as a family. Hard as a parent, because your children are there. I used to work 18, 20 hours a day, and literally that's why it was easier for the family to move into the radio station, because at least they could get their sleep and that. But it was a time of saying, God, you've called us to do this. Help us in this tricky period of our lives with children and sleep patterns and schooling and all those things. And we just kept trusting God that he would work through our children and in our children's hearts. And we're so grateful that they've chosen to continue to serve God, having been so thrown in the midst of seeing lives changed. And I think that was what was so amazing, because they would hear the stories of people who were contemplating suicide, and they would literally, this person would drive onto the railway track waiting for the train to come, and then somehow listen to Radio Fishhook at that time and hear a message that said, you may be feeling hopeless right now. You may be even contemplating ending your life. There is hope. Jesus is your hope. And then phoning from the railway line, still on the railway line, to our prayer line and accepted Jesus as their Savior. It was such an exciting time. And daily, many people were coming to know Jesus. And so what we did in those days, we also networked with 104 churches across Cape Town who had committed to supporting CCFM, because it later changed from Radio Fishhook to Radio CCFM.
So how long after the starting, when did it change?
It was a year later. Okay. We changed it to CCFM because initially we got the December license. We got another one in March. And then it was 1994. It was just before the elections. And so all community radio stations had to close down for that period of elections and for a few months after. And then we only started again later in October of 1994. But that time we got a 1-year license, and we had to share our frequency with another radio station, which was also quite tricky. So 8 hours on, 8 hours off. So it wasn't 24 hours on, but it worked really well. And then we still working, only volunteers. So literally every hour you had a different shift of people coming in from across the city. And in 1998, we got a 4-year license, which was just incredible. And at that time, we decided to be closer to the community, for the guests that were coming to the radio station, for the volunteers who were coming to participate. It would be a good idea to move up the line. And that's where we miraculously got the Musenberg building.
Wow.
And
I hear miraculously. I want to hear a story.
Yes. So we had been praying about moving out of this tiny little Sunday school house. We've got 250 people. Literally, you crawl in with people, and there's also prayer friends and everybody in between and guests, and it was pretty tight. And we saw this building, which we felt was perfect. Because
just before you go there, at this point, so 1998, you got quite involved. You actually also became station manager at some point. Were you already a station manager then, or was that later?
Yeah, I became a station manager in the December of 1993.
Right.
In the September, for that first month, I was just coordinating the programs and just making sure that they happened. And of course, everybody took leave. So we had a lot of people around. And but then when it came to December, they asked if I could manage the radio station. So that was quite a big jump for me, having been just a mom at home, a pastor's wife who was busy and called to serve God, but never had been in a management position before. So from December of 1993, I managed the radio station until July 2006. The first 8 years purely as a volunteer, and then in the last 5 years I did get a salary, which is also another story of God's provision, because sometimes we think that a salary is what is the way God provides. And this is just a personal testimony. And they decided to pay some presenters because they wanted some consistency on air. And then after a few months, they said, well, Avril, we can also give you something. And I was going to get 1,200 Rand for the month. I was so excited that I was going to earn some money.
Amazing.
But that month, the car broke down. The washing machine broke. Our door fell apart. And all the money, my whole salary, was spent on repairs. And that God just taught me a lesson, that He is our provider.
Yeah.
And God had been looking after all those things. But now that I had the money, it was all spent in that. And so for me, it was a real big, loud call from God saying, I am your provider. It doesn't matter what your salary is. You don't need a salary. I will look after you. And that has been our testimony as a couple, is that God has provided in amazing ways for us on an ongoing basis.
So back to 1998. So you were station manager, had been for 4 years, 4 years. And you wanted to move up the line to be closer to the community. Tell us that story of the building.
Yes. So we had planned to have a day of prayer and fasting on the 20th of December and of 1997. And on the Saturday afternoon, we got a phone call to say there's a guy called Paul and he wants to look around the radio station and meet us. And so Dad and I drove down to the radio station. We met this guy who was an American who had read about us in a newsletter that he'd received from HCJB, which is an international radio broadcast company. And he said, I'm just in the area. I have heard about your radio station. Want to see what's going on. We invited him in. He had a look around. And he said, whew, this is a very busy place. And so we said, yes, actually, we are having a day of prayer and fasting because we found another place. And tomorrow we're going to be really seeking God's face as if we need to move there. And he said, show it to me. So I had a little Morris Minor. This massive man got in with his knees tucked under his chin. And we drove to Muizenberg, 20th of December, bumper to bumper traffic. We had to get him back because he was meeting his family on Fishook Beach at 3:00. So we literally got outside what is now the radio station in Muizenberg, turned in the car park and had to get back to Fishook for him to meet his family. He looked at the building. He never said, it's great. He never said a thing. And we just drove back. And so on the Sunday, we prayed. And God said to us as leadership, we need to cast down nets and we need to trust Him. They had wanted 600,000 Rand for the building. And when our finance department put money together, when the trustees who were there, the people that were involved, we all took an offering, and what we could put together was 30,000 Rand. And so that Sunday evening, Dad, John, Manma, and the trustees went to meet with the seller of the building and said, this is our offer, 30,000 Rand deposit, a 5% deposit on this building. And he was from another faith, and he like, what kind of offer is this? 5%, this is nonsense. We said, we really believe that God wants us to have this building. And so we would like you to accept this. And we trust God that in the next 2 weeks, He will provide. Dad got back from the meeting and the phone was ringing. And he answered the phone, and it's this Paul guy. And this Paul guy said, hi, I've been trying to get hold of you. I just wanted to let you know that my family and I are willing to give you $80,000.
Wow.
Which is just incredible. Now, it was not the same rate it is now, but it was a lower rate. And he said, but what you need to do is you need to raise 80,000 Rand from your listeners. And so we were like so excited. It was amazing. Yay, this would have been exactly the amount of money that we needed to buy the radio station. And we were so excited. John said, oh, thank you so much. But can it be in the next 2 weeks? He said, sure, it'll be in the next 2 weeks. Don't worry. And with that, he put down the phone. So Dad phones the estate agent and says, we've got the money, we've got the money. And the estate agent said, well, who from? He said, Paul. He said, Paul who? He said, Paul from America. And he said, but does he own money? How do you know he's good for his money? Dad said, I don't know, but I just know that God is going to use him. And this guy was like, really, you are crazy. Mm-hmm. And then Dad and I still continued that Wednesday. We went on air and we told the listeners about this guy who'd made this promise, but we needed to raise 80,000 Rand and that people needed to put that money immediately into our account because we needed to pay the next week. Mm-hmm. Well, the day came for the money to come in. No money. We waited. Dad phoned the bank 3 times. That night, we cried and prayed, and in the conversation, he had mentioned the name of somebody that Dad had met in 1993. We found eventually this guy's phone number, phone him in America and say, do you know this guy called Paul? He's just promised us some money. Is he good for his money? And he laughed. And he said, good for his money. This guy is very good for his money. If he has promised you the money, you will get it. Well, we felt a bit relieved. 8:15 the next morning, the phone rings again, and it's the bank manager and said, John, just want to tell you, one massive amount of money has come into your account. What we hadn't taken into account was the 8-hour time difference. Okay. It had gone through from America, and he had put it in on the day, but it just took overnight to come into our account. Right. And we were so grateful. And at that time, I was still the manager of the radio station. Dad was away a lot. And the bank phoned me and said they needed the money, but we had to pay 3 months rental because we'd been in there 3 months rates and all kinds of things. Mm-hmm. And they asked me for a certain amount of money. And when I checked our bank account, all 119,000 of the 80,000 Rand had been put into our account. When we paid everything off, we were short 23 cents. God gave us that bill. Sure. An incredible answer to prayer through somebody who we'd never met, didn't know, and just faithfully just took the next step.
What an incredible story.
Incredible. And there's so many stories like that.
Yeah.
Sure. I remember when we had our first desk from Paul Barthners, they'd loaned it to us.
A
mixing desk for the sound. Yeah. And they'd lent it to us to try out for 2 weeks. Mm. They said, after 2 weeks, we need to bring it back or we need to buy it. Mm. And it was the day we had to return it. And I remember so clearly that we didn't have money to pay for it. And so we'd have to send it back. We didn't have it, didn't have the money. And I went down to the bank and I thought maybe something had come in or something. I went through, I spoke to the teller, said, please, can you check this account? Is there anything here? She said, no money for you guys. And I was taking steps down and somebody was in the car park and said, Avril, just wait there. And they ran across to me with an envelope and said, I've just met so-and-so down the road and they're not going to be able to get to you at the radio station. So they gave it to me and said, if I see you, to please give this to you. And Sam, it was exactly the amount we needed to pay for that mixing desk. Isn't God good?
Amazing.
Good. Sure. And, it wasn't just the physical things. It was the people he brought along. People who had the same passion and love for Jesus. Amazing. And the desire to reach people for Jesus.
Let's talk a little bit about leadership. You are an incredible leader and you led the station for many, many years. How do you approach leadership, especially within this context of a community radio station, lots of volunteers? Yeah. What's your approach to leading people?
Our approach is, in Christian ministry, God can use anybody and everybody. He has given everybody different gifts and different responsibilities. And it didn't matter what they looked like, how they were. I always have sought to find a place where they would fit into serving God. And sometimes I have, as I look back, there were some misfits, as we would think, in society. They just didn't fit in so well. But if you can find them a place where they can serve God, they blossom. And I have seen that time and time again. As a manager, it is my responsibility to help people fulfill the purposes that God has for them, and to give them opportunities that where they can blossom, where they can grow. You have less management issues then, you have happier people, and the mission is met because people are happy where they are. They're not being forced into a situation where they're not happy, that they can't cope with. And we had people doing admin who didn't want to speak to people on the phone, on the prayer line, or they didn't want to present or be a technical person, but they wanted to do admin. And I remember this one lady, she had a very croaky voice, and she was not a very personable person, but she took on doing the follow-up of the people who phoned in to our prayer line. And she did a magnificent job. Wow. Couldn't have got somebody better. She was totally committed to every person who phoned in. She would pray over their name, pray over what their challenge was, send them a personal letter with a booklet that would match what their need was, and refer them to a church. I couldn't have found anyone better than her to do that job. But God had called her, and was just trying to find the right place. And so when it comes to leadership, I just believe we all have a part to serve God, and it's trying to make a space where people will fit, where they can serve God.
Yeah, to not judge a book by its cover, not to judge people, not to write them off.
Exactly.
But seeing how God has gifted them and their strengths, and
exactly
putting them into the right area of serving.
Yeah, and you know how loyal those people become because it becomes theirs.
Yeah,
and I think as I look back on those early days, we were a family. We really were a family. It was anyone's birthday, we'd have birthday cake and sing happy birthday. And for some of our presenters and people, they had no family. And so this became their family. And they didn't mind staying on an extra 2 or 3 hours to answer the phone or to help in some area if there was a need, because they felt like this was just home. This was part of the family. And we were about our Father's business. That's what the focus was. We are about our Father's business here.
Amazing. CCFM is still going strong and has had a massive impact on Cape Town. What type of impact do you think? Tell us a little bit about how CCFM has impacted Cape Town.
Well, the radio reaches places that the church cannot reach. And I think that is such a powerful medium. And so people have been listening to the radio station, phoned in and spoken to prayer friends, or they've heard the gospel message being shared in a simple way, and they have received Jesus into their lives wherever they've been. And then if they've made contact with the radio station, they are then connected into a local church. And I know for some churches, the only growth that they had got was from the leads from the radio station. And so churches grew because they got new people into the church, people who were excited about knowing Jesus, which was an adjustment for some churches. But they got excited about reaching out and welcoming new people. We have seen young people come to know Jesus. The style of music, whether it be rock or metal or whatever, it's really hard for a church to meet somebody who's a metalhead. But when they hear it on the radio and they hear the message that is behind it, we had many phone in and pray to receive Christ as Savior because they heard the message of Jesus. And so the impact still continues, and daily at least one person is phoning in. We don't know about those that aren't phoning in, and praying to receive Christ as Savior through the ministry of the radio station. And for that we just give God the glory. Recently there was the AGM for CCFM, and they have an annual share-a-thon when they ask people to pledge their support to keep the radio station going. The support that the radio station is getting is phenomenal.
Amazing.
It keeps the radio station on air. And that, because it's impacting people's lives. People have been phoning in and saying, this has changed my life. I don't know what I would do without Radio CCFM. Radio CCFM has become my friend. Radio CCFM is something that has seen me through a very dark place in my life. And those were testimonies that were shared just last week at the AGM.
Amazing.
The impact that the radio station makes is far greater than we will ever realize. And even some of the staff were listeners, obviously, whose lives were impacted, and then have come back and have given and served because their lives have been changed because of the radio station.
And it's a real community hub as well, right? It's always been drawing people from the community, but CCFM itself has also gone out into the community. Tell us a little bit about that. I remember hearing stories about road shows and things like that.
Yes. Going out, having outreach teams, just going in the back of a bakkie with sound equipment and going to sports fields and presenting the gospel at sports fields, playing great music, going into shopping centers, old age homes. We even used to have a half an hour program for prisoners, and we used to go into the prisons and take messages from prisoners to their family. Now, often it was people sending messages to the prisoners, and then we thought, let's turn this around. And so we actually got messages from prisoners. And so that's the beauty of radio. You can go anywhere and it goes everywhere. And so having those outreaches, going into the community, supporting local events is a great way of connecting with new listeners. It grows your listenership, and it also is an opportunity to share Jesus.
Tell us, what were some more surprising or unexpected ways listeners engaged or responded to the station? Maybe they phoned in. Was there anything that was interesting or unexpected?
Yes, I remember very clearly. It was the days of Pagat in our community, and we realized that there were many Muslim people listening to our radio station. And Sam, it was your dad who came and offered to have people who were Muslims who'd come to know Jesus to share their testimonies. And so we started on a Tuesday and Thursday at 11:15 having Muslims come and share their testimonies on air. And then we would invite people to call in if they wanted prayer, if they needed prayer. And that way, then we would send them to the right people to get follow-up on that. And that was so exciting for me because it was into a whole different area. And you know what was so great is that people would gossip the gospel, is what I used to call it. Because one lady would say, hey, you must tune in tomorrow. I'm going to be on the radio at 11:15. And so they would pass the message on. And I remember some feedback once coming from a team that were walking the streets that said, we were going to knock on someone's door and we heard the radio station was on. And we felt it was better to just leave the radio station on than to knock on the door and interrupt that moment. Right. And so that was a surprising thing. We had women's programs where we did recipes and health talks and how ladies from all groups listened to that radio station for their recipe of the day, because they knew that 9:30 every morning was going to be the recipe of the day. And so they would tune in to the radio. So those were surprising things that people enjoyed and clung onto and told others about. And so it was a matter of word of mouth that spread the listenership of CCFM. An interesting thing is we even made Carte Blanche once.
Carte Blanche was a TV show.
Program. It still is on a Sunday, and it's where
I don't
there's
watch
controversial.
TV, so I don't know if it's still on. But yeah.
It's often they deal with controversial subjects, and this lady had said that CCFM had spies in her house, and so she sent Carte Blanche around, and she said they are spying on me because that person on that day was talking about me. And so that same presenter was coming onto air, and the next thing, arrives Carte Blanche with their camera crew and everything, because this person was going on air, and they wanted to interview this person because she had been accused of being spying on a listener who was living far away. And so I remember being quite scared, like, oh no, and saying, we haven't got time to spy on anybody. They were just sharing their story.
Wow.
And that lady had felt it was her story.
Yeah, so directly into her life.
Yeah. And that's the beauty of community radio, is having real people share their real stories about a real Jesus.
Amazing.
And it is.
So you mentioned you were a station manager until 2006.
That's right.
Yeah. How did you approach succession and letting others carry this vision forward? How did you hand things over?
Yeah, I think it was very much a shared responsibility, because I never saw myself as the boss as such. So there were lots of people covering different areas. And I did give 6 months to leave. God was breaking my heart to work with the homeless. And so I just knew that I needed to take that next step and to work with the homeless who lived around the radio station. And so we did employ somebody to take over as the radio station manager. He had been a manager before, he had been in marketing, and the leadership felt that that was something that could be worked on. And so for me, it was a very easy transition, in that everybody had their jobs, everybody was settled in doing their ministry, and this person was just going to come in to help us on a different level. And so for me, it was an easy transition. It was like, God's got something on for me next. And so that was great.
Amazing. Just in closing, if you could go back and give yourself one piece of advice when you started out, what would that be?
Document things more. I think when you're in a founding position, when you're working things out, things are changing constantly. And you don't always have the time to actually document it for the person who's following.
Right.
And so as I look back, I wish I had documented more. It would have been easier for the person taking over, and you wouldn't have had to go over the same thing again and relearn it. So that, I think, was a weakness on my behalf as I look back. But I think as I've been involved in another founding situation as well, it's one of the challenges, because everything you're constantly developing, tweaking, changing until you get to the right point. And even that needs to constantly be tweaked. But when you're when God is burdening you for something, and you're giving birth to it, it's hard to know where the end step is. I've just realized you just got to take the next step, because sometimes if you look too far ahead, it can be overwhelming. And I think if I knew in the beginning what it was going to be like, I probably would have run away. And for me, it was just a matter of, okay, what's the next step? What can I do? And it's just been a step at a time and not a race to the end line. But if I documented more, it would have probably helped a whole lot along the way. But when you're going along the way, it's always not so easy to document, because you're still like working it out.
Great stuff. Thank you so much, Mom, for joining me on the show. This has been so amazing, such amazing stories, and I was so looking forward to hearing those stories. Really, really amazing. And I'm pretty sure our listeners will feel pretty encouraged by these stories and by your faith and your amazing leadership. And thank you for joining us today.
It's been a privilege. God bless.
If you've enjoyed listening to Born to Build, please subscribe to the podcast and click the notification bell to get notified when the next episode is out.